All right, good evening, everybody, and thanks so much for joining Future Peds Res for our last webinar of the season. It feels like it's been such a long time since we have last seen you all, and we missed you very much. And we know you've been busy getting all of your applications together and submitted, and now we're in this awesome period where we are all anticipating the next few weeks for sure. I'm positive that all of us here are, and in that anticipation, we are excited to bring you a webinar this evening about navigating the interview season as a pediatric applicant. We have some awesome guest speakers who are here to chat with us about interviews and virtual interviews in particular and what that looks like. So we are so happy that you have joined us, and we can go ahead and get started.
All right, my name is Stephanie Maeda, and I'm one of the co-directors for FPR. I'm a fourth-year medical student at Western University of Health Sciences, College of Osteopathic Medicine of the Pacific Northwest. Thank you guys all for being here.
And my name is Caroline Maltese. I work with Stephanie as the other co-director for FPR. I'm a fourth-year student at Penn State College of Medicine, and we have proudly served as your co-directors for this year and are happy to be here and are wrapping up this last webinar of our series for this summer. So thank you again so much for being here.
We would also like to give a special shout out to our Associate Director of Webinars, Sheena, and she is also a fourth-year medical student. Thank you, Sheena.
And we would like to introduce our APPD faculty advisors. So first we have Dr. Michael Dell, who is the Vice Chair for Education at Case Western Reserve University School of Medicine. And then tonight would also not be possible without the help of Colleen Hughes, who is the Associate Executive Director for APPD.
We would also like to acknowledge and thank our ComCep faculty advisor, Dr. Rachel Thompson, who is an assistant professor of pediatrics and director of fourth-year pediatric medical student education at the Boston University Chobanian and Avedisian School of Medicine, Boston Medical Center, who is also one of our guest speakers for tonight. Moving into the agenda and what to expect for this evening. First, we'll start with some introductions to our guest speakers and panelists. We'll then move into a general advice section for interviews. This will be followed by a frequently asked questions section with the guest speakers, followed by a what to expect after the interview section, and then finally closing remarks and a live Q&A. We ask that you guys please ask your questions in the chat, and hopefully we will get to them at the end of tonight's webinar. We would like to thank and acknowledge our guest speakers who are here with us tonight. First, we have Dr. Rachel Thompson, who is an assistant professor of pediatrics and a director of fourth-year medical education and advising from Boston University Chobanian and Avedisian School of Medicine. Next, we have Dr. Albana Knight, who is the Vice Chair of Education and Clinical Professor of Pediatrics. She is at the Seattle Children's Hospital and affiliated with the University of Washington. And third, we have Dr. Joanna Lewis, who is the Program Director for Advocate Children's Hospital at Park Ridge. She is also the chair of the APPD Residency Recruitment Action Team. We have a great panelist of speakers, and thank you guys all for being here this evening.
All right, we are going to go ahead and get started by handing it over to Dr. Rachel Thompson to talk about our virtual residency interviews.
So welcome to all you guys, and thank you so much for being here tonight. And I want to start first by saying congratulations, since y'all have launched your applications on ARIS and sent them off into the ether. And now we are really excited as members of the different programs to get to start to meet so many of you guys as you head into the pathway towards your interviews. I imagine some of you guys are excited and some of you are a little bit nervous, and hopefully we can answer some of your questions today. And I really do agree that having Drs. Knight and Lewis here together will have the opportunity to answer a lot of your questions. But I'm going to start by chatting with you a little bit about the virtual residency interview process, a little bit of tips and tricks. I start by putting this old New Yorker cover, which hopefully is vintage at this point but is one that reminds me of what it was like early in the days of COVID. I've conveniently covered up her martini glass with something much more appropriate for our talk tonight. But I think it also says a few things. What the group on the other side of that computer can see is all they can see. And we want to talk a little bit about that sort of sense of like how to create an interview space and a real interview job, interview moment, even though what's going on around you in your room may still be a little bit more chaotic, but we want to create that space together, and we'll chat a little bit about that. So if we want to advance to the next slide, we're going to start with some of the basics. What are you going to do before interview day? And I know so many of you guys have so much more experience on Zoom than back in the beginning of the virtual process. But I think also many of us have become a little bit too accustomed to Zoom, and we forget a little bit about what's around us, what's behind us. We kind of have gotten a little bit lazier about it because we're also used to being able to view into each other's homes, which was not the case a long time ago. So a couple of reminders. Simply put, the whole thing should be about the interview. Minimize whatever distractions might be out there. And so I'll start with the obvious. You got to be on time, just like you would for a real in-person interview. And the trick here is that because there's no flights, there's no knocking on doors, you don't have to find your way, but you still have to actually make sure that you're in the right time zone. This is particularly an issue if you're interviewing at programs on the other side of the country. It's also something you may address if you're one of our international medical graduates who is interviewing at a program in the States. One of the other tools that you guys will become much, much more familiar with is Thalamus, which is one of these web-based platforms that upwards of 90% of programs are using this year. It's going to be the platform that you're going to be getting most of your information about interviews from. They have lots of help sections online. I'd encourage you guys in these next couple of days, as you're waiting for the interviews to get started and for the interviews to roll in so that you can sign up for interviews, that you familiarize yourself with that platform and how it works. How do you sound your best and how do you look your best? Well, sounding your best, a lot of us, again, we're used to getting into lectures or didactics, and we're doing those all over Zoom. And that's fine sometimes if the Wi-Fi jumps around a little bit. You have 15 minutes to make a good impression in a lot of your interviews, maybe a little more, maybe 20. If your Wi-Fi is jumping around and is super spotty, I would encourage you guys to find a way to get a strong Wi-Fi signal. If you have roommates who are all interviewing on the same day, ask at school if they are going to set aside a spot with strong Wi-Fi where you can connect. Or kick it old school, get an Ethernet cable, get a jack for your computer, because I know none of us have plugs on the side of our computer anymore, and plug yourself into the wall. It will give you a constant stream. I know it's not Wi-Fi anymore. You're actually like hardwired in. It will give you really good connection and you won't lose it. I will say that you should also plan for the fact that you may lose connection with somebody. That does happen. So early on the interview, if you see you're getting laggy interview connection, you may say, hey, this is getting really laggy. Maybe we should jump to a phone. Is that a possibility for you? And you can make that exchange. Have some troubleshooting in your back pocket. What about looking your best? A plain professional background goes a long way. Have good lighting. Make sure that you are well lit so they can see you and you can read each other's facial expressions nicely and have what feels like a more natural conversation. And be just job interview ready. And lastly, minimize those distractions. And as I say this, literally my dog, who you see in that top photo, was clawing at my door to try and get in. This is the reality of working from home. If you have dogs, if you have cats, if you have children, do your best to find a space where they can't get in, because we're very pediatric. We like a little goofiness from time to time, but don't let that be the lasting memory of your interview day. Have it be about you. All right, move to the next slide. So other basics that you guys are probably, again, familiar with are having to get accustomed to the different platforms. Pay attention in advance if they say that they're using a platform other than something that you already have downloaded on your computer. If it's not, if they say we use Google Meet and you don't have it, they say we use Microsoft Teams and you don't have it, get it downloaded, make sure it works on your system. Some programs have moved to using Thalamus, which is the same program where you'll do a lot of signups for your interviews. And so that may be a video-based platform you're not familiar with as well. So take a look at the online website, learn how to troubleshoot. How do you mute yourself, unmute yourself, fix your background? Those are the sort of like key things. You can also do speed testing if you're not sure if you have the video speed where you are. There are online, websites you can just do speed testing on your home computer, although know that that does change from day to day. All right, next one. All right, some more nitty-gritty. Preparing for your interviews is actually important. This is not a time to come in and plan to like ad lib and come up with questions on the fly. This is a time to come in like you know as much about the program in advance so that you can learn about them while they're learning about you. Because remember, as much as this is a process where you're hoping they're going to offer you a spot in their residency program, this is you applying for a job and wanting to know that this is the place you want to work in the future. And so have your notes ready. One of the nice things to know is that while you're doing one of these Zoom platforms, you can have your notes open on the side on your screen so that you can reference them without breaking eye contact with people. And I would say use your questions to your advantage. So think of that in two ways. One, what are things you want to know about the program? Are there things that are critically important to you and your personal happiness that will, in your educational goals, your learning goals, that you can't learn from the website, because please don't ask questions that are already obvious on the website, that you feel like you can ask of that program in that moment when you have the right person in front of you. If you are someone who wants to be able to compare and contrast that kind of characteristic across programs, maybe that's a question you ask of every program, every time, so you can compare and contrast. The other thing is not what do you want to know about the program, but is there a list of things you want them to know about you? So think of this as like a sneaky way to sneak in those things that maybe they didn't ask you about on interview day. So are there 3 things, like say you want them to know that you plan a future in global health or that global health is a really big deal for you. And so if they say, you know, what other questions do you have about the program or about us? You can sort of throw that in there. Oh, I had this amazing global health experience where I learned X, Y, and Z. And I'm just curious if you could tell me more about what are the global health opportunities at your program. Something that maybe, or maybe you have a specific question because there's not a rich amount of data on their website about that. So what do you want to know that helps you choose them for your job? What do you want to share with them? And can you cue your questions to them to give them that information? So those are questions. Now, what about the strategy to stay organized? When this gets going, I know some of you may have heard about interviews already. There have been a couple slipping out before October 10th, but when October 10th comes, you may start to hear about them more frequently. It's not going to be like the floodgates open and everybody starts offering all their interviews on the 10th, but they'll come much more frequently and you'll have to stay organized. Where are the interviews? When are the interviews happening? When is the social hour happening? Is there a special DEI meeting happening that you want to attend? So plan something out. Do you have a special calendar that you're looking at? Is it specially color coded so you see where these are? Put the Zoom links or the web links, whatever they are, directly in your calendar so you can access them. You're not searching for them at the last minute. So keep yourself organized. And I highly recommend you use this as a place to take notes and keep your other sort of notes close to you so that you're looking at them as you're asking questions on the interview day. And I also want to say, try to avoid too many interviews in one week. It can make you feel stale when you're answering questions, and that's kind of hard to overcome. And also take a look, and maybe we can put in the chat the joint letter to the pediatrics community, which has some nice guidelines about the sort of interview process for residency. Next slide. All right, now here's the big thing, right? You're all wondering, like, what about the questions? So definitely plan to anticipate and rehearse some of the commonly asked questions. And think about, as you're planning your answer, does the answer I'm giving them share a skill that is important to residency, right? Know the job you're applying for. They're asking you the question because they want to know about a skill that you're bringing to the table. If you can supplement it with anecdotes and examples, that makes it much more memorable. And especially if you think there are some questions you might get asked that will be more challenging for you to answer, say maybe there's an academic problem in your record, for example, ask friends for feedback about how well you're explaining that concern. Do I sound too rehearsed? Do I sound authentically me? Does it sound genuine? And then big picture, am I talking too much? Am I talking too little? Am I making this a conversation? So what about some of the specific questions you might get asked? Common question domains, these are no secrets. I'm not like telling you the secrets of my residency program. These are out there. We commonly ask about your strengths and weaknesses or areas for growth. We might ask about academic challenges or something like that that's on your application. We frankly will probably ask about your hobbies if you put them on there because they're a really great way to make conversation. And I encourage you to make sure you don't end up with the deer in the headlights of, I can't remember the name of a single book that I've read recently, even though I told you that my favorite thing to do is reading. So like, make yourself feel comfortable, plan some answers to your questions in advance. The other ones that can be a little bit trickier, some programs use what are called behavioral questions and other places use standardized questions. So standardized questions simply means they ask the same questions of every applicant, and maybe your interviewer just has one question that they ask you or 2 questions that they ask you. It's the same 1 or 2 questions they ask all of their their applicants. Behavioral questions, so examples of them might be like, how did you behave in certain situations, so that they understand how you might behave in a similar situation in the stress of residency. So tell me about a time when you were disappointed in your performance and how did you handle it? Or tell me about a time when you tried to accomplish something and you failed. Tell me about a time when you had to build a relationship with somebody you didn't like. The common answer format, so you are thinking about those, are What was the situation? Can you describe that situation to them so they understand? What was the action that you took in response? And then what was the result and what did you gain or learn from that? Very simple, but sort of thinking in advance, maybe looking online at some of the common behavioral questions can be helpful. A couple of anecdotes may apply to the vast majority of them. So it's not like you have to have a different answer for every single behavioral question. Next slide. Believe it or not, at some point in the not too distant future, these interviews will fly by and you'll find yourself in January and you'll be thinking about making a rank list. I just want to point out that there are 3 very helpful videos. If you're not familiar with what the rank list process is like, I highly recommend taking a look at these. The NRMP offers these. We can put the links for these. I can throw them into the chat. But how the match works for the US grads, there's an algorithm approach, how they work for international medical grads, and then lastly, how do they work if you, or how does the match algorithm work if you're in a couples match? I want to reassure you that the match is what they call applicant proposing. So therefore it favors your rank order list, but both you and the program have to rank each other. So what that means is when you're making your rank list, don't choose the program who you think is most likely to match you as your number 1. This is the job you want. Put the job you want at the top of your rank list. Next slide. So a couple takeaways here. So prepare, meaning prepare your room, prepare your tech, prepare your questions, and prepare for some internet issues potentially. Practice, phone your friends, make sure they feel like you're being genuine and really be yourself. That's who they want to get into their program, not some alternate version that you're putting on interview day. And then this one I haven't mentioned yet, but please take notes. When you finish that interview, you'll think, oh, I'll remember everything in January. You will not. Simply put, you will not. So please write down, how did you feel about that day? What was the visceral response? What are the things that you liked? What was different about this one? I'm in the process right now of going on college visits with my eldest son. And when we go back, I say to him, what did you think about this one versus this one? Can't remember, even though it meant so much to him on the day. I'm like, let's pull up our spreadsheet, because I do with him what I tell my medical students to do. Let's look at the spreadsheet and look at your gut reaction list. How did you feel after we visited that college or that college? And it's making all the difference in the world as he's doing his process. I tell you, it will make the same for you as well. That is all I have for you guys. I am delighted to field some of the questions. I think people have been answering them along the way in the chat, but we'll have lots of opportunity for more questions as we move on. So I'll turn this back over to our great leaders.
Thank you so much, Dr. Thompson. We are going to launch into our more structured portion of our FAQs. So we are going to start off with question number 1. And this is for Dr. Knight. What advice do you have for applicants when scheduling interviews? Are there advantages to interviewing earlier or later in the season?
Hi, everyone. So just a few things to consider when you're scheduling your interviews. One, you want to respond promptly. So as interview offers are coming through your email, make sure that you are taking a look at them, that whatever email address you're using, that you're checking it frequently and that you're responding. Often we will advise that you do 1 or 2 warm-up interviews first. So considering using your home program as one of your first interviews, or picking a program that you think might not be at the very top of your list might be a good place to start, and strategizing around keeping some of your presumed top choices in more of the middle part of your interview schedule. Even though you're not traveling, as Dr. Thompson said, interviews do get exhausting. Being on a virtual platform does get exhausting. So as she said, really think about how many interviews you want to schedule in a week. That will be different for different people as to what you can tolerate, but it's not easy to do multiple in a week. So considering how drained you might be after an interview, or how you might feel, will be important. So consider spacing them. I put it in the chat as well, but thinking about when you schedule these interviews, if you are on a sub-I rotation and you're really trying to perform well, or in a visiting rotation, you might want to minimize high impact interviews, or programs that you really want to go to, minimize interviews with those during that time. There's no real advantage to interviewing at a program early in the season or late in the season. This isn't a rolling interview process. Programs are considering interviewees that came on the very first day, as well as those who are interviewing on the very last day. But you will potentially have some interview fatigue later on in your interview process. So again, scheduling those interviews that you might be more excited about kind of earlier to mid-range in the season if that's available. I think those are the big things. The last thing I'd say is we'll touch on it later, but scheduling potentially some programs that are a little lower on your list for later in the season, because that might give you some flexibility around cancellation if you decide to do so.
Great, thank you, Dr. Knight. Our next question is for Dr. Lewis. If you do not get an interview at a program you're very interested in, should you follow up with a letter of interest?
Great, thanks so much. I wanted to say one other thing, just really quick about the question for Dr. Knight. What I've heard some people do too, in terms of when they schedule interviews with programs where they've already rotated, is that sometimes even if you really love a program, it's one that you rotate with. I think there is something valuable about going back to do your interview a little bit later in the process because, right, you've been there, you loved them, and then sometimes going to look around, you'll come back to that program with some good questions that you've learned along the way. So that's why some strategies are go somewhere you know first if you're nervous because you already know them, but there's also an advantage to going later. And the truth is, just like she said from the residency program side, it's not rolling admissions like college. We're reviewing everybody, and making our list at the end. In terms of this, we have asked in pediatrics, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, for you to, get the status of your application to everyone, like to tell people where they're at by December 1st. I would say that if there is a program, certainly, so the way you show a program that you're very interested in them is that you have sent them a signal, correct? So if there's a program that you have signaled that you have not heard from, that might be sort of a first tier of a place I would reach out to. I would probably not do that before about November 1st. Because like Dr. Thompson mentioned, on October 10th, so this week, is when some programs will start sending interviews. So we are still actively reviewing a lot of applications. And so giving people a couple of weeks to get through those, I think, is helpful. I would reach out to whoever is listed as their contact person. So that is not always the program director. So you don't want to be emailing a program director when the instructions on their website have told you to email someone else. So I know that you're eager, but what we also want is people that can follow instructions. So we want to know that you've looked at the website, you've seen that, what's there, and you reach out to that person. I would certainly not, if that doesn't yield you the results you want, I would certainly not reach out more frequently than every 2 weeks. And I would also say that mass email communications of like, dear sir or madam, I am interested in your program and I have not heard from you will not be helpful. So if you are specifically interested in a program, you should email them with specific reasons why you're interested in that program and your availability for an interview. One caveat too is the way you can help each other out is if you decide you're not going to interview somewhere, let the program know. And that allows them to offer that interview slot to someone else.
Perfect.
Oh, there we go. I didn't even know. Sorry, Abhina, take it away. Yeah.
Seamlessly transitions into
Yeah.
our next question, which is if you've received an interview at a program that you are no longer interested in, how do you professionally decline or cancel the offer to interview?
Yeah, thank you. So as Dr. Lewis stated, it's okay to decline an interview. Probably not at the very beginning of the season. You want to make sure that you've gathered enough interviews in a way that'll make you more likely to match. But as the interview season and process goes along, you will hopefully get lots of interviews and be able to decline some if you have put out applications to a lot of people. So first, programs really appreciate if you decline or cancel in an interview earlier. So giving programs a couple of weeks is really nice if you can, because it then allows them to reach out to individuals who might be on their wait list for interviews, and they might be able to fit in another student into that spot because spots are not unlimited. You again send an email to the point of contact for that program. So as Dr. Lewis said, reading the materials that you have, emailing the specific person, and really just saying, I appreciate this opportunity to interview with your program. After considering, other programs, I've decided to cancel this interview or to decline this interview. Thank you again for the opportunity. And that's fine. You don't have to give a lot of excuses or go into details, just nice and direct about what you would like from the program.
Great,
And then if
thank
you're
you.
using Thalamus, you do need, the thing would be to go back onto Thalamus and cancel your interview. Or else the program has to do that for you. So I would say typically most people go in Thalamus, cancel their interview, and then if they're going to send an email, they send the email after. I wanted to let you know that I've canceled my interview. Thank you so much. We did ask in the letter to the community, if applicants could make decisions by around November 15th, that would be ideal. Like if you're holding, 20 something interviews, because we are trying to get back to people by December 1st. So that gives us a couple weeks on the other end.
Perfect, thank you. And question number 4 is for Dr. Lewis. What are some illegal questions and how we should not be asked about on interview day? How can we answer them without answering in a professional way and report them as a violation in a way that protects us as applicants?
So hopefully this will not happen very often. I would say my hunch is that if a faculty member asks you a question that is an illegal question, they didn't know that they didn't realize they were asking you something wrong. So like my first thing would be like to proceed, give someone grace, but they should not be asking you illegal questions. So I want to keep in mind what has become an illegal question has changed drastically over the last 5 years. It used to be the most common thing when I was interviewing someone in person to be like, so are you looking all around the Midwest? Are you looking in the Chicago area? How far into your interviews are you? All of those break the ice questions are now not allowed. So somebody might slip up once, but we are not supposed to ask you about geography, about if you're applying in other specialties, about how many programs you're interviewing at, what other programs that you've interviewed at. And then certainly we should not be asking you questions about things regarding protected class, or if you plan to have children during residency. Those types of questions we should not ask. If you bring something up, we are allowed to ask a follow-up question. So like if you say, I'd like to know what your parental leave policy is, and somebody follows that up, you've sort of opened the door for that. If someone asks you a question that you find to be inappropriate, I would say when somebody asks you any question, you can always take a minute to pause. And so you can say, I need a second to think about that. And then I would respond and say, what I'd like to, based on your question, I would like to talk to you about, and sort of change to a different topic that you feel comfortable talking about. Reporting a violation never gets back to, never is correlated with you as an applicant. So I don't want you to worry about that. Like if you want to report a violation to the NRMP, it does not work that then they call me and they say, Rachel Thompson said that on October 12th, you asked her an inappropriate question. So really don't worry about that. And I am confident that my student affairs colleagues would be able to help you more with sort of knowing that process along the way, and that your schools will be there to back you up if there's an issue that comes up. I don't know, Rachel or Abhinav, do you guys have any other thoughts around this one?
I think that what you said is really great. I think it's important if you pause and, you should recognize that you don't have to answer the question just because it's there and just because they've asked it. You also don't have to come right out and say to them, I don't think you're allowed to ask that question of me. And so if it's something that you're like, actually, all of my programs are in the Midwest, I'm only applying to the Midwest. And so it's really actually to your advantage, and you feel like it would be to your advantage to answer that question, you certainly could if you wanted to. But I think if you know, to be cautious around those things that could negatively impact you, it's okay to sidestep it and answer as like, you know, what I'd like to talk to you about is X. What I'd like to talk to you about is why I'm interested in your program in the Midwest.
Yeah, I think too, somebody saying like, what interests you in being in Texas or what interests you in being in Chicago, that's not a violation. That's like a normal question about why you might want to come to that program. And the only other caveat I would say is if there is something, and tell me if I'm wrong, you guys know this better, but my assumption is if you write about it in your application, then I can ask you about it. So if you write in your impactful experiences about how having your first child during medical school shaped you as a pediatrician, I can ask you a little bit more about that because you've put that in your application. Am I right there? I hope I'm not. Yeah? Okay.
Mhm.
Great.
Okay. We will move on to question number 5, which any of our 3 panelists feel free to answer this question. How do you recommend students prepare for interviews? Do you have specific resources for frequently asked questions?
I would say for me, that what you so I want you to have reviewed all the information about my program that is either publicly available or that I have sent to you. So like for our program, I'll tell you, when we confirm an interview offer, I send you a link to my website. I send you 2 attachments about like a day in the life in our program and what our curriculum looks like. And I send you a link that has like a YouTube video that we made about our program. So my assumption is that you will look at those before you interview for my program, right? Now, it doesn't mean you won't ever ask me any questions about things like that, but coming prepared is important. So what I don't expect is that you have looked up the scholarly interests of the faculty with whom you're interviewing. Like before we were virtual, we wouldn't tell people who you were interviewing with until you showed up at the door because we didn't want applicants to worry about wasting their time. When you interview for a fellowship, that'll be a different story. But really, it doesn't matter. Like if you know where I did residency in advance to talk to me about that, please spend your time learning about the program and not necessarily learning about me. That's from my program perspective.
Thanks, Dr. Lewis. From the applicant perspective, I always advise my students to reread your application because it's been a long time since you stressed all over it and put it together and sent it in. So remind yourself what you said, what activities you shared, what experiences you highlighted, because anything that's on that application is fair game, from the smallest piece of information to the largest activity that you did. Definitely connect with your advising team at your local institution if you have one, or at the School of Medicine. If possible, do a mock interview with someone, whether it's through your advising team or with an individual whom you trust. Could be a resident even, could be a faculty member in pediatrics, just because it's been a while since you interviewed and probably for admission to a program. So it's nice to get a feel for what an interview would be like. And then as you're reading through your application, starting to think about which experiences or activities you've done highlight different skill sets or different lessons learned. As Dr. Thompson mentioned, behavioral interviewing is a part of this, asking you about strengths, weaknesses, experiences, ability to pivot in times of stress. All of this comes up. So if you've already considered how different activities might illustrate those types of things, it helps you to better be prepared to answer those questions when you're stressed.
And just to highlight something that Dr. Knight said, like really, if you have put down there that you've published a bunch of papers and that you had a big role in writing those papers, you may get asked about those papers, and yes, you may have published them a while ago. Please reread your papers. You may be interviewed by somebody who does a lot of research who actually looked at your paper, and so they may want to ask you about it. So you should be at least as familiar with it as they are.
That was all great advice. And next, our last question in the FAQ section is open to all of our panelists. And what is the biggest piece of advice you would give to an applicant on interview day?
I think, sorry, my kids are singing in the background. There's just like always singing in my house, so I apologize. I think the best thing is like, we just want you to be yourself, and we want you to ask thoughtful questions that are helpful to you. So I think when you're thinking about what questions, like Dr. Thompson was talking about earlier, I'll tell you a question I don't find helpful is somebody asking me my favorite thing about the program, because I love everything about my program, and well, almost everything. And I might then spend a lot of time telling you about something that's not actually important to you about the program. Like, what if I go on and on about the continuity clinic experience, and really you're very interested in what happens in our NICU. And so then you don't know if it's because I don't love our NICU or just because that's not the thing I happen to pick. So at thinking about what questions are going to be helpful, and when you're with me as a program director, I would not recommend asking me about schedule logistics. Like, that's, you only get a short time with me. You can ask the residents and the social or something like that if you want. But I also don't think that's how you should make a decision about a program, because that could change during your 3 years. But the core of like our mission, our vision, our values, how we think about curriculum, those types of questions are going to be helpful. So being thoughtful about what you want to know about us, and then asking us those questions so that we can appropriately give you the information you need when you're going to be making a really important decision.
I think for me, breathe, pause, listen. I think when you go into an interview day, you're very stressed, you're very nervous, you're maybe a little worried. And so take a breath. As Dr. Thompson said, when you're asked a question, you can always take a pause, take a beat, and center yourself as to this is what I'm doing and I'm present in the moment. The other piece of that is listen to what's actually being asked of you. I have been a part of multiple interviews where individuals are nervous, and so they sort of just don't hear the question that's being asked or answer the question in its entirety. So make sure that you're paying attention and that you're listening to what's being asked. And if you're given a complicated question or a multi-part question, you can always jot down a little note as to what's being asked. You can share that, oh, I'm just going to write this down just so I make sure I answer all of the parts of your question, just to ensure that you are really answering what's being asked of you.
And I will say my part by also answering the question that was in the chat about the time limit for your answer. I love it when it turns into a conversation. And so if you can imagine that your interview should be a conversation where this person is really looking to learn about you, it helps you to plan your answers and response. If you are thinking about, even if you just want to clarify the question and you say, you know, as Dr. Knight was saying, are you asking about the experience or are you asking about my response to it? I might say, oh, that's such a great way. I'm glad you clarified. Can you actually tell me both? Start by doing this or do that. And then, or I say, oh, well, tell me about this first. And then I may have some more questions for you. So that it comes a little bit of a dialogue as opposed to a monologue. It's very hard. The interviews will drag for the interviewer if they're just sitting and listening and hearing a long response. So think about when to pause, ask if they are interested in something and learning more. Make it, highlight it with examples. And to circle back to what Dr. Lewis said, just try to be yourself. Don't try to perform in a way you think that program wants you to be, because they want you to be a good fit for them. And this is their opportunity to figure out if you're a good fit. And you also want to know if you're a good, if they are going to be a good fit for you. And you'll learn much more about the program in a way that's meaningful to you if you ask questions that are specific to your needs as a future employee of that program.
Great. We will wrap up this portion of the webinar, and I'm going to hand it back to Dr. Lewis to talk about the general timeline of things, and then hopefully we'll have a little bit of time at the end to get to some of those questions in the chat that haven't been answered. So Dr. Lewis.
Great. So everything I'm telling you here is also in what Dr. Thompson put in the chat with the recommendations for interview season. But I just wanted to go over a few things in terms of timeline. So the recommended first interview offer release date for pediatrics is this Thursday, October 10th. Now that it is not like in OB or an ortho wet where that is the one universal interview offer date. So Dr. Thompson mentioned this before. Programs will start offering interviews, and some I know already have. So that's okay. People have like different, this is what's recommended. It's not required. I wanted to just make a caveat of something I heard today, which is people in Florida are being very concerned about their power and electricity over the next couple of days. So it might be that some programs in Florida like decide to send out interview offers tomorrow or the next day. Please don't think that they're like breaking a rule or not a trustable program. And at the same time, while we're speaking about Florida and the Southeast in general, we are all very well aware that applicants in those areas might not have the same access to like internet and email and everything as everyone else has. So we will be sending a message to the whole pediatric program director community tomorrow, just reminding people to maybe give people a little bit more time if that's where they are coming from. We really are trying to think about the applicant. So this week you will start getting some interviews. As I mentioned, this will proceed until December 1st, when hopefully at that time, people will find out the final status of their applications. That would be either you are offered an interview, you have been offered a position on the wait list for the program, or unfortunately, you will not be offered an interview at the program. There is a lot of waitlist turnover at many programs between December 1st and the end of January. So all is not lost if you are placed on a waitlist in December. February 3rd is when the NRMP opens for submission of your rank order list. Just a reminder that registering in signing up in ARIS does not sign you up for the match. So don't forget to do that. And then March 5th is the last day to certify your rank order list in the R3 system. Next slide. I wanted to talk for a minute about post-interview communication, and I have put some things in bold and blue that I hope you take away as important. So overall, you really don't need to worry about post-interview communication, okay? There are 3 times where we think, if you really feel like you need to communicate, this is what you would do. So first of all, if you wanted to send a thank you note, this is really considered optional. And if a program on your interview day says that you don't need to send a thank you note, you should believe them, okay? They're not trying to find out who will really do it. We're not being sneaky. If you send a thank you note, you also should not expect a response, okay? Some programs may write you back, but we're trying very hard to not violate the match agreement about post-interview communication. If you have specific follow-up questions from your interview day, please reach out to get those answered. And also if you need to provide an update to your application, like if you have something that is important, a new publication or an award, something like that. I want to take a minute to, just while we're here, to address something that has been noted to be new this year since ARIS opened. And that is, I think, a misconception that what every program did on September 25th is download everything from your application and are reading it somewhere offline. So I'll tell you personally, more than ever before, I am getting 15 to 20 emails a day with people saying to me, I wanted to let you know I have one more letter. I wanted to let you know that my ECFMG certification is up there. I wanted to let you know I have one more letter. ARIS is a live, living thing. So people are really reviewing it all the time. So you do not need to spend your time emailing every program right now. This would be like what we talked about previously, where if you haven't gotten an interview and you haven't heard from them, you might say, I wanted to let you know I have one more letter, but we are actively looking at all of this information. Just a side note. Letters of intent, go back one. Letters of intent are not expected. And if you write somewhere that you are ranking them first, don't write that to more than one place. because that's impossible to rank more than one place first. But remember what Dr. Thompson said, the match is, applicant facing or whatever the wording is. And most programs are not adjusting your place on their rank list based on this piece of information. They're not expected to reply. So I feel like it's like these candy hearts on Valentine's Day. Like you do not need to give out 50 candy hearts. And I would say you likely don't even need to give out one. Next slide. I want to address in-person visits or second looks. So this is something relatively new in pediatrics this year. And the blue things here are very important. Thing number one is that some programs may host in-person visits. Some applicants may want to see programs or cities in person. If a program hosts an in-person visit, it is 100% optional. All programs have been asked to certify their rank list prior to the visit. So you attending this will have no bearing on your placement on their rank order list. They will be collecting RSVPs by someone outside of the program leadership. That is because we don't want to know before we certify our list who's coming. So please don't say, I know you don't want to know, but, oh wait, go back a second, sorry. Please don't say, I know you don't want to know, but I'm coming. Okay, we really don't want to know. We are trying to be as equitable in a process that we are figuring out. All interviews, we should be invited if they have them. And these programs will also host an interview session. So, Stephanie, click. This is not what we want your calendar to look like for the month of February, okay? No. What we are thinking is that if you really need this, we are saying applicants, we hope, maybe attend between 0 and 2 in-person visits. It is not worth, for example, getting on a plane to fly across the ocean to go to an in-person visit, okay? At the same time, I really want to say, please do not assume anything about why a program does not offer an in-person option. What we really don't want is for you to think like that programs that offer in-person second looks this year care about their residents, and programs that don't offer them don't care about their residents. That's not the way it is at all. I want to remind you, this is the first year that this is being tried since the pandemic, and not everyone, we just still need to check it out. So please, programs don't want to know if you're coming till you show up, and don't make an assumption about the program if they can't offer that. So just some important dates to remember. Like I said, you have to register for the match. You need to certify your list. You can uncertify and certify as many times as you want, but whatever is there on March 5th is what it is. And if it's not certified, you don't have a rank list. You will find out your match status on Monday the 17th. If you have not matched into a program at that time, you will be able to enter into the SOAP if you have chosen to do so, and that will last for 4 days, and then match day will be on March 21st.
Great, thank you, Dr. Lewis. And next we're going to finish up on learning about Dr. Knight's advice for how do you build your rank list.
Yeah, so this is one of the harder things you will do, but it will be okay. So as Dr. Thompson said, this is really your list. It's what you want. So what are your goals? What are your career goals? What are your personal goals? Who's your support system? Different things are going to matter to you in making your rank list. So as you're going through the programs that you see, that you went and interviewed at, and that you were able to see virtually, take a look at those notes you wrote and see how the program aligns with all of these different things. You might be making your rank list based on geography. It might be very important that you're in a particular place in the country because of your family support or where you want to train. It might be important for you to think about the educational offerings of a program. Perhaps you're looking at certain tracks, like the research track or a community practice track. You might be really focused on, is this an inclusive program? Are they supportive of my intersectional identities? So that might take more of a priority or preference. Sometimes those lists of what the vacation schedule is like for a program don't really help you figure these other things out. So do a self check-in to see what your priorities are and how they allow you to assess a program. Usually for most people, the top of the list, you want to consider it as preference, not feasibility of match. So like Dr. Thompson said, we are not gaming a system here. Whatever is your top program, list it as your top program, and so on and so forth. Your bottom program is sort of your compromise, the bottom of your list. It might not be your favorite program, but you know, it has some good offerings. It's going to give you a great training experience, and you will be a great pediatrician when you leave that program. As far as not ranking a program, the conversation I have with students around that is if you really plan not to rank a program at which you interviewed, it should be better to you to not match than to go to that program. So if you are willing to enter the SOAP process as opposed to go to that program, then don't rank it. If you are unwilling to enter the SOAP process, and you'd rather go to that program, then rank it towards the bottom. So consider those things as you are creating your rank list.
Great, thank you. I know I learned a lot from this presentation and definitely helped calm some of my anxiety and nerves moving into the interview season. Next, we want to open it up to the audience to ask some question and answers for things that were not addressed. And then please refrain from asking questions that do not benefit the whole group. I think it'd be great to use our expertise to answer things that address the group at large.
And the first question, like Stephanie said, feel free to put them in the chat. The first one that I had seen that I think would benefit the group is, how do we answer the question, tell me about yourself? And anybody from the panel can feel free to answer.
I think that's a great question. I mean, I will say it feels like at first it seems like a softball. It can be one that can run away with you. I think that I've seen a question in the chat around like, is there a specific time limit for answers? I will say that I'm cautious around asking that question now, because I realize that sometimes in that anxious phase and not knowing exactly what your answer should be to that question, you can run away with the entire interview slot telling about yourself. So a couple things I would say is there anything particular that you would like to know about me? Or say if there's something that you want them to know about you specifically, something about, what has been formative in shaping your interests or your career trajectory, that's a great thing. Just because what you want to remember is it's a job interview. Your answer to tell me about yourself is, what does this person need to know to help them understand whether I'm a good fit for this job? And so telling them about yourself is like, what are the skills, the qualities, the attributes, the behaviors that you have, and where do they come from that will make you a good member of their future team?
One thing to remember, different programs give faculty interviewers different pieces of information about you. So in order to really decrease bias as much as possible, people have different ways that they do that. So there might be some places where one of your faculty interviewers have been completely blinded to your application, like they don't get your application at all. And so sometimes those are the times when you're getting asked that question, like, tell me a little bit about you, because it's not that they haven't read your application, they actually don't have it. Many places will tell you that in advance, like some of your interviewers will not have seen your whole application. So that is the time when it's most pertinent to be able to have a good answer to that question. So I wouldn't judge that program that they didn't know anything about you. That was an intentional choice to be able to have, with at least one person, you to be able to tell your story.
I see a question in the chat about, is the rank list from the program dependent upon your interview performance, or do we consider other factors? So one of the things that I think is important is that pediatrics has really tried to broadcast the idea that we do a holistic evaluation of each of our applicants. So there's no one part of this that will make or break your application to the program. The interview, I always say to my students, is a way of making what's on paper become three-dimensional. So we want to take what we see on paper and get a better sense of how meaningful was this experience that was on there? What was can you explain to us a little bit more so that we can get a sense of you, your interpersonal skills, and your interactions with us as different members of the program? But there's so much more that we can't cover on an interview day. And so we are gleaning that from the application itself. And that's everything from how you did in each of your clerkships and what the narratives are in your clerkship evaluations, to elements on the MSPE about your noteworthy characteristics, your ARIS application and what you've cited as your meaningful experiences. And then if there are any concerning elements on your application, things like professionalism concerns that may have arisen over the course of your time, or academic concerns. So all of those different elements that come across both through the ARIS application and on interview day are holistically taken into consideration.
Another question that I think was already touched on, but maybe if we can just quickly clarify, if we have updates as applicants now, would you prefer that they are sent before interviews are sent out, or would you wait until maybe that November 1st, Dr. Lewis, that you were talking about, to then provide some updates?
I guess it's really hard. I think it depends. I know that's not a great answer, but it sort of depends what the update is. And what type of position you're going for. So for example, like if you're applying to a physician scientist track within a program and you've had something published recently on research you've been doing, that might be helpful for them to know. But maybe not if you're applying to like a primary care track, or that's not focused on research, but like if you get an award, I don't know, it's just hard. I think too many emails are likely not helpful. So I don't know. I know people are like, all you want is to make sure that you're noticed. I promise you, like I have spent all weekend, I will spend tonight, all day tomorrow, all day the next day, along with my colleagues, reading your applications. So the more emails we get with little reminders, the less time we're spending reading the applications. So I would think about how significant it is before you send an email just for the sake of sending an email.
Sounds great.
Can
Dr. Thompson,
can I pick one of the questions out of the chat?
Sure.
Here about asking about negative questions, and Dr. Knight answered some things, but I just wanted to amplify a couple things. So question was, is it appropriate to ask some negative questions of residents? For example, what is your program's strongest and weakest rotation? Or are there any clinicians rotations that are notorious for being unpleasant? I would just say what you will get as an answer from that one person is the experience of that one person.
Right.
You will probably not get a really broad-based perspective on that program. And I will share my own life example, which is that in the era of in-person interviews back in the, millions of years ago when I was applying to residency, I went to a wonderful residency program, and I went in and I sat down at the luncheon with a resident, and someone asked the resident about the residency program. And before she could answer, she dissolved into tears and started crying. She was exhausted, I think. She was overwhelmed. My takeaway was this was a brutal, terrible residency program, which then I have subsequently found and met many people who would have been in my class from that program who loved that place so much. It was the best place they ever went. They had a wonderful experience in residency. I just happened to sit down with one person who was pretty tired that day, and that happens in residency, and had an off day. So I think it's hard to ask questions about if a program is, if there's notorious problems with the program. I think I would more want to find out about what is my desire to be at that program, and what, the kinds of questions I'm asking are not things that are warning signs about a program. And I think many of you are sort of looking for warning signs. It's pretty uncommon because we get pretty closely followed by supervisory groups to make sure that we stay in line. And so I would sort of use this as an opportunity to figure out more about, is this place supporting you and where you want to go with your career?
Right. I mean, one thing you probably want to know when you're asking about like a negative rotation is, I think maybe what you're trying to find out is, when there are areas for improvement in a program, how is that addressed? When there's changes that are coming, how does your program elicit your feedback as a resident? Like, maybe that's more of the question that you're trying to ask, but I think asking for areas for improvement is helpful, but I think all programs should always be improving. So don't be thrown off if people list a couple of things to improve. A reminder that every pediatric resident has new program requirements that are starting in July of 2025. So many places are sort of figuring that out right now. So if they don't have that all set, I also would not fault them for that. So I think just, yeah, keep that part in mind. Another thing I would avoid is asking programs about other programs. So in big cities, this is not uncommon. So like if you're interviewing in New York, don't say like, what's the biggest difference between this program and that program in New York? Or if you're interviewing in Chicago, like what's the difference between this program and another program? What I've told my residents to say is, I've only ever been a resident in this program, and this is the only program to which I can speak. So it's not going to be a very helpful question for you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Dr. Lewis, Dr. Knight, and Dr. Thompson for answering those questions. Unfortunately, our time has run up for the evening, but we do appreciate all of the amazing questions that were in the chat and all of the very insightful answers from all of our panelists. And on behalf of the entire Future Peds Res team, and specifically from Stephanie and I, we just want to say thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you so much for your attentiveness through this hour, but also through all of our other webinars. And we hope that this was helpful to you and that you got to learn a little bit more about programs specifically, and also how to be an applicant. And we hope that this has eased some of your worries moving through this process. So we do just want to say thank you so much. And Stephanie, if you wanted to add anything about the survey, that would be great.
Yeah, as always, thank you guys so much for joining us. We encourage you to take our post-webinar survey so that we can improve for future seasons to come. And from all of us at Future Peds Res, we just want to wish you good luck this application season. Thank you.
Congrats on choosing the best field, everybody. It's great to be a pediatrician.
You're gonna be great.
Good luck to all y'all.
And thank you guys for being here this evening. We really appreciate it.